Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, the founder of SteelCityUnderground.com, Joe Kuzma, flying solo once again today. And, you know, I'm thinking about making this a regular habit, not only having some of the guests that I've had on over the last month or two or so. Absolutely, all of the guests have been great. I challenge everyone, if you have time, to go back into the archives, whether you listen on iTunes or whatever platform you end up on, YouTube and the various other outlets that this show is available on. Go back and listen to some of the shows with some of the guests I've had on. All kinds of great people from different sites, different walks of life, different areas in Steelers Nation, and even worldwide. We even had Simon on from the UK. So I challenge you, go back and listen to some of this stuff. And speaking about the different outlets that you listen on, I was looking on iTunes yesterday just to see, I was just looking to see where the Steel City Underground podcast was, just as far as like rankings and popularity and everything. And I must thank all of you listeners for your support. Obviously, you're sharing and telling your friends about it. But the only thing that's really lacking on iTunes is if we could get some reviews. I would love to have some feedback. Many of you have given me great positive feedback through the various social media channels and whatnot. But I do understand, and I'm just as guilty of this myself, there are several podcasts and some that are just not sports related whatsoever. Some of them have to deal with, well, you know, I'm a website guru here and a social media guy, and I'm always glued to my phone, and I'm always listening to tech-type stuff. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else of not leaving any type of, 5-star reviews or any major write-ups and comments on the iTunes or even the podcast app if you're using an iPhone, which is derived from iTunes itself if you're using a desktop, Mac, or PC application there. And it's just because of the nature of, well, they've really screwed up iTunes, in my opinion, the last iteration that they came out with. I don't know what they're on, version 12 or whatever, and they've made the podcast thing just kind of, if you have your own kind of queue of podcasts that you're subscribed to, it's just kind of a real headache to keep track of everything and then, of course, to leave a review. So if you just do a simple search for Steel City Underground in the search box on the podcast app or any of the actual apps or services you're using that you're listening to this show on, I'd greatly appreciate it. And if some of you, if you don't like the show, and you might not like today's show because I don't have an agenda again, but getting back to that in 1 second, if you don't like the show, that's okay too, because I like honest feedback. I'd like a review. Just please, if you leave like a 1-star, just tell me why. It's still bugging me that somebody left a thumbs down on a YouTube video a couple of weeks ago, and it was such a positive show, and I'm like, the only thing they might not have liked is that they saw, hey, it's the Steelers, and I don't like the Steelers. And, I could even sympathize with that, but with no comment, I have no clue how to improve or get better. So reviews are always appreciated. Now that I'm done soliciting and begging for that, I mentioned no agenda today. I think I'm going to make that a category when I'm flying solo. I seem to have a lot of fun just talking football. That's what I like to do, is talk with each and every one of you. I really do wish one of these days the planets are going to align. Not just having maybe one or two guests on, maybe a round table of some sorts, but maybe get some callers on. But with a small little girl, everyone who's a parent knows how challenging that can be, just to get a quiet household that's full of pets and a kid, and then having your wife go along with the whole thing, especially when she's not a Steelers fan herself. For those of you who are new listeners, I live in a house divided with a Cleveland Browns fan, and my family is pretty much split 50-50, amongst that being that I grew up in Northeast Ohio, equidistant distance between the cities of Cleveland and Pittsburgh. So we're a very, in a territory where we're very split and everything is divided. But regardless, today I wanted to talk about whose spot is safe. We're always talking about things on the show. And we're always talking about, this guy's on the roster bubble. This is going to be the camp battles. Everyone's talking about the 53-man roster, and we're talking about during the season how maybe those last 5 to 10 spots are always in contention and guys are called up from practice squad, players getting injured, just opportunities that are gained or missed almost every day throughout the league year. It's an ever-evolving organism, which is an NFL franchise. But, and I'm going to go maybe aside from the obvious, but I'm going to go through all the personnel groups. Now, if I leave someone off this list, I may have to cover it in another show. I'm just going down this pre-generated list that I'm reading out of one of the various preseason football guides that are out there. And I'm going to start with a personnel grouping, such as the wide receivers, the offensive linemen, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to name some names on here. I'm going to pick a name. I'm going to not try to be too obvious. So I'm going to try and go with one that maybe you didn't think, it maybe doesn't stick out so much as, okay, their spot is safe. They're not going to get cut or released. And here's why. So let's just roll with it. Like I said, no show notes here. If I have to pull up any statistics, that might be a small issue when I roll with no agenda. And some of you probably think I'm really crazy when I do this stuff. But you know what? I love talking Steelers football. Let's talk about whose spot's safe out of the receivers and tight ends group. They're packaged together here. We don't have very many tight ends on the roster. We know some of the names that are coming into camp. Let's roll down the list that's predefined here, starting with DeMarcus Ayers, who is the 7th-round draft choice from Houston, a rookie this year coming in. Don't know that his spot's necessarily safe. Obviously, Antonio Brown, he's not going anywhere. So I'll glance over him. I'm going to glance over Sammy Coates. Ladarius Green just signed in the offseason through free agency from the San Diego Chargers. Pretty sure with his new 4-year deal, his spot's safe as well. Darius Heyward-Bey, Jesse James, Eli Rogers, who comes to us after being injured and signed to a futures contract from the previous camp last year. Matt Spaeth and Marcus Wheaton. So out of this, who isn't the obvious person whose spot is safe? I'm going to go with Darius Heyward-Bey. I was talking with my friend sorry, Nate, I butchered it. Nathaniel Bodner over at Steel City Report on the previous show that we had just the other day here. And we were talking about how the coaching staff is just phenomenal for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You got guys that have a ton of experience, not only just with the team, but with the NFL. And Richard Mann is one of these coaches, the wide receiver coach, who's been with the team 4 or 5 years now. And he turns everything to gold. And you look and see what the Steelers have done with wide receivers over that span of time and the guys that they find and seemingly create and turn into superstars. And anyone that plays with Ben Roethlisberger, a surefire, hopefully first ballot Hall of Famer, because like I was saying and talking about how we get maybe a little oversensitive and defensive about our Pittsburgh Steelers as fans. If Ben Roethlisberger isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, I think we burn Canton to the ground. It's that simple. And we know that Ben doesn't get the respect that he deserves, so most people would think we were even crazy and even alleging that that could be a possibility. We all know from the various lists and rankings and all the other BS that's out there on the internet and television these days that our beloved Big Ben just does not get the respect that he deserves, as most of the Pittsburgh Steelers players do not. When compared to something like Dallas Cowboys players get an awful lot of love, like a Tony Romo or a Dez Bryant, and even Zeke Elliott when we were talking about the trios. He hasn't even taken a snap in the NFL yet, and he's getting all this love. But out of the receiver group, whose spot's safe? Because of Ben Roethlisberger, because of Richard Mann, because of this support staff with Todd Haley, Darius Heyward-Bey comes in, plays for Martavis Bryant beginning of the season last year. Not any type of major eye-popping numbers, but if we saw as any indication as to how slow of a start Emmanuel Sanders had as a rookie here and moving up the charts and eventually becoming a high-priced free agent with Pittsburgh, and some of that actually precedes Richard Mann coming to this team and working with the wide receiver groups. But anyway, Same thing. They're working with Ben Roethlisberger. Todd Haley's here for a portion of time. You have the same sort of deal happen with Jericho Cotchery, who was a free agent and not maybe a solid player. I like Jericho Cotchery even as a New York Jet. Be completely honest, I thought he was a fairly solid player, a guy you could always throw to on third down and pretty much know if the ball's there, it's money. He's going to catch it. That's the way we felt about Heath Miller as well. We might not feel that way about Darius Heyward-Bey, but like I said, when I was comparing Mike Wallace's statements and him saying that he was better off now and better player now than what he was when he was in Pittsburgh, which may mean that he matured or whatever. If you'd like, once again, you could go back. I challenge you, go back, listen to that particular show. Listen to one with Nate, too, about this coaching staff, Richard Mann, Todd Haley, and what they've done, too. Actually, one of the more longer and more, more stat-filled, numbers-filled segments that I've done in a while here on the Steel City Underground podcast. So, and we were talking about all of this, but anyways, I really, really, really projected Mike Wallace with the Baltimore Ravens as being the Darius Heyward-Bey of their team. The only difference is Darius Heyward-Bey, unlike Wallace, comes into the league, I believe, a 9th overall draft pick with the Oakland Raiders, maybe even the same year. Let me see here. I'm going to pull this up. And let's look. Darius Heyward-Bey, yes, was drafted in 2009. So I want to say that was around the same time as Mike Wallace. I could actually find that information out quickly. But Darius Heyward-Bey, as you may or may not know, just did not have a very solid career in Oakland. And then he didn't do too hot with the Indianapolis Colts either. He comes here to Pittsburgh, and I thought he did fantastic last year. I even showed some of his route running where he takes defenders with him and enables other players to get open. His speed you have to respect. They did play the long ball to him. Very much reminds me of a Mike Wallace type player. He may not be as shifty, may not be as fast because obviously he's a little bit older, just a little bit older than Martavis Bryant. Martavis Bryant being a big-bodied receiver and a very good pick coming out of the 4th round. But you look at somebody, you look at Mike Wallace, for example, and Mike Wallace did come in the third round of that same year, 2009, as Darius Heyward-Bey. So DHB comes in, and he's expected as a first-round draft choice to be a number 1 wide receiver in this league. And for various many reasons in Oakland, different coaching staff turnover all the time, which is something me and Nate talked about the other day. And then just the different quarterbacks that they're always dealing with Oakland, like Jason Campbell. I'm trying to think who else was out there. I know Bruce Gradkowski are currently working at a backup position, maybe facing Landry Jones for the number 2. In fact, that's a very good place to jump to right now. But Bruce Gradkowski was one of those guys throwing passes to Darius Heyward-Bey, and not necessarily a terrible quarterback, but one of those guys that's an NFL journeyman. And, you know, they have all these different Carson Palmer, who had a miserable time with the Raiders. So now that there's some stability with the coaching staff that's around Darius Heyward-Bey, I expect his spot to be safe. I expect him to maybe make that leap. He's going to be competing with Sammy Coates, but there's definitely a spot for him. He's a solid special teams player and was rewarded with a 3-year contract this offseason. Because of all that, his spot is safe. And talking about Bruce Gradkowski, we have 4 quarterbacks that are on this NFL depth chart, pre-camp roster, whatever you want to call it. And obviously, I'm going to be saying obviously more than Mike Tomlin today. So obviously, Ben Roethlisberger is a name that's not going to be going anywhere. But that's not the guy I'm going to say whose spot's safe. We know that already. Landry Jones is the guy whose spot's safe. I won't even say Bruce Gradkowski, but I think he'll be there because Mike Tomlin has always been a fan of having veteran quarterbacks on the roster. But Landry Jones is going to be given every chance to compete for the number 2 spot based on his play last year. A lot of people like to rag on him. I've talked about Landry many times. Many of those times would start Facebook and Twitter fights, and everyone has the pitchforks, torches out, and the Yinzers are yinzing. But Landry Jones, I'm still very high on. No, I will not buy a $900 authentic Landry Jones jersey. I'm not that high on him. But this is the make or break year. If he regresses, the Steelers might be looking for 2 backup quarterbacks to Big Ben next season. But if Landry Jones keeps it up and there isn't a competitive market as far as outpricing him as a backup for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I do think Landry Jones, if he does good, spot safe here and into the future. I don't know that he's the quarterback of the future after Big Ben. Still going to be, by the time Ben retires, Landry Jones will have been in this league for, 7-8 years at the very minimum. And who knows, he may not even be ready by then to ever be a starting quarterback. But as a backup, I do feel he brings something to this team. I feel he turned the corner last year. Trust me, folks, if you think I'm nuts and you're just ready to hit the pause or the stop button on this podcast, I'm not. I was just as against Landry Jones the previous season as many of you were because he was uncomfortable. He had no confidence. And it's like he held onto the ball forever. It was almost like the guy had never played football before if you watch, and he's playing against preseason guys that these defenders are going to be bagging groceries within a week or two or selling cars or whatever, wherever life takes them. Maybe they did get a college degree. They didn't go leave their university or whatnot early to pursue a career in the NFL, and they're going to go and start up a business as a lawyer or whatever they have a degree in. So I don't know how many people have law degrees. I know Ryan Fitzpatrick, I want to say, he's a Harvard guy, right? Very smart. Well, I don't know that necessarily just going to Harvard qualifies somebody as being smart. Now that I think about the way Ryan Fitzpatrick played in that last game against the Buffalo Bills, with the Jets losing to them and sending the Steelers to the playoffs. Thank you, Ryan. Smart guy. Love you. So Landry Jones is safe out of the quarterbacks. Offensive linemen. We have David DeCastro, Ramon Foster, Marcus Gilbert, the newly signed Ryan Harris, rookie 4th-round pick Gerald Hawkins. We have Chris Hubbard listed, Marquise Pouncey, Alejandro Villanueva, and Cody Wallace. A lot of solid names there, a lot of obvious choices there. There's the buzzword again. I'm going with Cody Wallace. This is why. Versatility, of course. I don't think the Steelers can rely on maybe using Chris Hubbard as a backup center. And Cody Wallace, okay, Pro Football Focus, as we noted in the previous episode, had him as one of the bottom 5 centers. But you know what? That offensive line still did good. Big Ben having the least amount of pressures of any quarterback in the NFL last year, also according to Pro Football Focus, and also being one of the better guys under pressure, of course, throughout all of the years. So when you add Marquise Pouncey into this, and Marquise Pouncey being a top 5 guy the previous year when he was healthy, offensive line's going to get better. Offensive line will be even better when you have quality depth. You have a versatile player who could play in more than one position and has actual NFL starting experience and a rapport with your starting quarterback. Actually, all your quarterbacks, because Cody Wallace was taking snaps with Michael Vick and Landry Jones last year too, so we tend to forget about that. So no matter what website wants to grade Cody Wallace where, his spot safe with the 2016 Pittsburgh Steelers. He will make the cut. He's a cut above the running backs. We have Le'Veon Bell returning, Roosevelt Nix, Darrell Richardson, Fitzgerald Toussaint, and D'Angelo Williams. And this is a tough one. I've got 2 names I'm going to say are safe on this. And I'm going to say both Fitzgerald Toussaint and Roosevelt Nix. I'm going to go out on a major limb here. I don't think Darrell Richardson, who was out of football and hadn't played since 2013, who was a 7th-round draft choice in 2012 for the then St. Louis Rams, is a guy necessarily, out of a small college too, Abilene Christian. I don't think Darrell Richardson's a guy that's going to compete with someone who stepped up admirably, and actually the Steelers win because Fitzgerald Toussaint in the playoffs has a very good game, him and Jordan Todman. So Todman is no longer on this roster, but Toussaint is, despite even the fumble in the Broncos game. He doesn't fumble there. That guy becomes a Pittsburgh legend going into an AFC Championship game as a third-string running back who had a tremendous amount of pressure, a street free agent who was signed to come in and just in the middle of the season. Formerly a college free agent that went undrafted, and he played for Michigan. So he has some big game experience. despite that fumble, everyone has forgiven him for that. I do think Fitzgerald Toussaint makes this roster. Also, Roosevelt Nix I'm going to throw in here too because, of course, the signing of David Johnson, who I didn't mention, of course, in the receiver and tight end portion. David Johnson can play. He's kind of one of those H-back guys that could play fullback or tight end, kind of like Will Johnson did last year. The Steelers kept both Will Johnson and Roosevelt Nix on the roster. Roosevelt Nix was a project player converted from linebacker to fullback who's actually panned out in that conversion. Shared a really cool video over on Twitter, Facebook, and via the Steel City Underground Vine last week of Rosie Nix forcing a fumble in the Oakland Raiders game. And if you check out that game-winning touchdown with the San Diego Chargers, the one where Le'Veon Bell scores just as time expires, that edge is set by number 45, Rosie Nix. So there's two, not just one, but two game-altering plays. Those are the type of things you look for when you're trying to get guys on this roster. Pretty much anyone could go out there and play a position, but are you making a difference? Are you making an impact? And yes, Roosevelt Nix, in your second year from Kent State, you most certainly are. Another one of these guys that was just an unsigned college free agent, originally with the Falcons, comes over to Pittsburgh. They saw something in him, and wow, that guy's just a small ball of energy if you ever look at him. We're going to flip focus over to the defensive side of the ball, starting with the line. We have a draft pick in the third round, Javon Hargrave, Cameron Heyward, Kashad Lyons, Ricardo Matthews, Big Dan McCullers, Stephon Tuitt, and LT Walton. And this is an actual really tough decision here. I don't know. I can't say for sure that Lyons, Matthews, or even Walton are all safe. The other guys should be okay, including Big Dan. I still think Big Dan entering his third year, there's still some upside there, and the coaching staff still working on what was a raw prospect who was drafted in the 6th round of 2014. He's also a mountain of a man, just like Alejandro Villanueva, who converted from a defensive end and a tight end. He played for like 4 positions in college, and he's a mountain man that made it as a left tackle last year. So I think the Steelers like their project players. I'm going to say Daniel McCullers is the safe guy here. I really enjoyed seeing him come in on the defensive line, and even in some of those sub packages, I would actually enjoy seeing even more of him, and I want to see Javon Hargrave as well this season. Big Dan, they were going to call him the Big Snack, kind of like Casey Hampton. I don't know, Shade Tree maybe was another nickname maybe thrown around between these mammoth guys who play on the offensive line. Love to give the big guys nicknames. That's just how it works. Being myself, I'm 6'5" in the 240 range, so I'm not a small guy myself. I'm used to people calling me all kinds of different nicknames. I just think it comes with the territory of not fitting in. My feet hang off the bed. I don't fit in bathtubs. There's a little joke for you. But you know what? I can reach the top shelf when people need help, so that always helps out. The linebacker core, Anthony Chickillo, Bud Dupree, Travis Feeney, a rookie this year, LJ Fort, who I believe made the active roster for at least the Cleveland game and maybe was activated for the playoffs as well. He spent some time on the practice squad. James Harrison, Steven Johnson signed over from the Tennessee Titans. He pretty much fills the role that Sean Spence vacated. It's like they flipped spots with Spence going to Tennessee himself in free agency. Jarvis Jones, Tyler Matakevich, also a rookie, Arthur Moat, Ryan Shazier, Lawrence Timmons, Vince Williams, and then I don't even like the Jordan Zumwalt's names on here, but even Steelers.com had an interview with him and overcoming these injuries over the last couple years. He was drafted in the 6th round of 2014 and has still not made an active roster. He's just been injured for pretty much 2 years. So of all of these players to say whose spot's safe, I could actually see the Steelers retaining 10 or 11 linebackers. It's really what their system dictates and what they want and what they need. I want to say Anthony Chickillo is the guy here whose roster is safe, and he's a little more of the low-hanging fruit. He's one of these guys that could be a practice squad type guy. He played mostly special teams. He's going to be fighting to make this roster with the incoming rookies and some of the veterans that are there. I mean, I could go with a real obvious pick like Arthur Motes isn't going to be going anywhere, nor is Vince Williams. So I wanted to take somebody that's maybe a little bit out of the norm and say that a year of experience in the system is going to help a player who converted from defensive line to outside linebacker, somewhere where the Steelers actually have a tremendous need for talent. If the technique and the talent shine for Anthony Chickillo, we could see even brighter things. And even being a late round, 6th round draft pick, I think a lot of people will liken Chickillo to somebody like Brett Kiesel. Though he's a smaller player, he's not a defensive end at the NFL level, being only 6'3", 255. But once again, he was a product from Miami, big school experience. I think some of that has a lot of weight that's carried with it versus some of the other players. And I don't know. I just see Chickillo being getting more playing time last season than somebody like LJ Fort. I don't even know that that's necessarily a camp battle worth discussing. We're going to move on to the defensive backs. That will be the corners and the safeties. I don't know that I could pick one of each category, but let's take a look at Artie Burns, 1st-round draft pick from this year. Ross Cockrell signed off waivers from 2015 after being released by the Buffalo Bills at the end of 3rd training camp. Actually had a pretty decent year last year with the Steelers, splitting some time starting as a corner. We have Sean Davis, who's the 2nd-round rookie. William Gay, who is the cornerback 1, almost by default, but William Gay coming into his own. One of those guys that wasn't necessarily one of my more favorite players, and then he left to join the Arizona Cardinals and then came back. And now he's one of the more, likable faces for his colorful celebrations and whatnot. And you know what? I think he's a pick 6 away from leapfrogging Rod Woodson's record for interceptions with the Pittsburgh Steelers as a career leader. Well, actually, not just interceptions, but interceptions for return for a touchdown. Currently, William Gay is tied with Rod Woodson, one of my favorite all-time players. I actually own a number 26 Rod Woodson throwback jersey. I loved Rod Woodson growing up. They both have 5 pick 6s in a Steelers uniform. Kind of hard to believe. Most of you probably weren't aware that William Gay is tied with Rod Woodson and could surpass him. So if he gets another one of those crazy, like bird-like dances in the end zone like I've shared against the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati last season, he's going to be the career leader in pick 6s. That's a very, very interesting stat for Will Gay. Robert Golden is a player that came off of being a special teams captain and saw some significant playing time last year when Shamarko Thomas, another name on this list, just did not pan out. Senquez Golson, who was last year's 2nd-round draft choice. He was on the injured reserve all of last year. Did not see any action. Another draft pick from last year who was called up from the practice squad to probably protect him from being poached by another team. That's Doran Grant, the 4th-rounder in 2015 that came from Ohio State. You have Mike Mitchell, who's one of the starting safeties, Ross Ventrone, and then Donald Washington. And Ross Ventrone, I've talked about many times. Guy's been cut like 41, 42 times the total transactions in the NFL between the Steelers and the Patriots since 2010. I don't think he's a safe player. I don't necessarily know that Doran Grant is a safe player, but the Steelers obviously called him up to protect him and maybe see what he can do this offseason and maybe earn himself a spot. My guy here, the safe one, and this probably isn't even fair since he signed a new contract. I'm going to go with Robert Golden, a 3-year contract, rewarded, special teams stand out, has an opportunity to start opposite Mike Mitchell as the other safety. And I'm going to pick another one here too and go out. This really isn't going out on a limb, but Ross Cockrell, I don't see any competition for him. He could potentially lose a spot to one of the younger players like Senquez Golson or Artie Burns, but that's yet to be determined. We have a guy who is entering his 3rd season in the NFL. Experience in this system, it just totally trumps youth. It always has, despite the influx of young faces that are coming in on this defense, and I'll be talking about that soon. And I'll also be talking about the special teams unit in an article and perhaps a podcast, which would be a little bit harder, but I'm currently working on a Heyward-Bey project just to show that punting numbers are something that's very awkward to just take as a face value of net yards or whatever averages. It just doesn't work out into something that's really a comparable statistic. You can put Ben Roethlisberger up and say he threw this many touchdowns, this many interceptions, and had this completion percentage, but you can't do that with punting. A punter might be punting from their own 48 just because they're out of field goal range, but he can't boot it 50 yards and plus and let it bounce in the end zone and the other team take it from the 20. So you have a lot of weird things like that where he's punting 30 yards there, and 30 yards is short. You want guys to probably punt about 40-some plus is probably, and when you get any more than that, it's probably a bonus, but that's about where you want it, and you want to stop the returner short, fair catch if possible. Obviously, the best situation. Anything inside the 20 is going to be good. So Heyward-Bey has a lot of that going on, but he's not the guy I'm going to say safe in this competition, and I'm not going to say out of the specialist that Chris Boswell is either. We may have forgotten. There is a player who's been with the Steelers. He's one of the guys who's still hanging in here. Heath Miller finally retires. Ben Roethlisberger's been here for 13 years. One of the other elder statesmen besides Ben and, of course, James Harrison, who's been in the league going on his 12th year. Lawrence Timmons in his 10th, actually been there longer. Greg Warren, the long snapper. He is my obvious pick. He is one of the most dependable guys you will ever have, plays every single game. He's played his entire career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was a college free agent in 2005. And the guy he's been snapping to how many different kickers last year? How many punters over the last 5 or 6? I think the Steelers have probably had 6 or 7 punters. They had a new one every year. Up until this year, it looks like Heyward-Bey's job to lose, as opposed to let's flip a coin and see which guy we're going to get. In fact, 2 years ago, we were talking about Zoltan Mesko, and I didn't get to mention this in the previous show, but we brought up his name, and he actually came in. The 2 guys that were in camp, and I don't recall either of their names right now, and I want to say one ended up in Buffalo, even though the Steelers did trade Brad Wing last year, their punter, to Buffalo as well. It was Mormon. I want to say it was one of them, and I'm trying to think who the other guy was. It might have been the punter from the previous season. One of them wins the job, but even after the final 53-man cut, Zoltan Mesko gets dumped from the New England Patriots. The Steelers jump on him off of waivers, just like they did with Ross Cockrell. And then Mesko, I think, only lasts 3 or 4 games with the Steelers himself. So it's never a guaranteed type thing. But these are all these players that Greg Warren is doing the long snaps to. You have the various punters, or maybe even a quarterback that's back there like a Landry Jones that's holding for the kicks. You have to be reliable, consistent, on the job every day, and that's a position where if you're not available and you're not good, you're expendable, because what else does a long snapper do but snap the ball? This isn't like where you could keep a Shamarko Thomas who's a safety that can also play special teams in special teams coverage and make tackles and whatnot. So kudos to Greg Warren on a very long and probably mostly unrecognized Steelers career. I wish I could do some type of highlight reel for Greg Warren, but there's not really much to show, to be honest. So with no agenda, those are the players whose spots are safe. Trying to recall from memory here, I just said Greg Warren, Ross Cockrell, Robert Golden, Anthony Chiquillo from the linebackers group, Big Dan McCullers, Landry Jones, Fitzgerald Toussaint as a running back. My offensive lineman pick was Cody Wallace. And my receiver pick, for sure, Darius Heyward-Bey. Those are the players whose spots safe. Those will be guys that I'm putting money down on it. Not real money. Can't afford that. Told you I had a small girl and a wife. It's not even my money. But those are the guys I want to say end up making the final 53-man roster. Ladies and gentlemen, if you listened to this long enough, you may have forgotten that you need to go back to iTunes or your favorite podcasting app and leave a review. I'll also accept some reviews, thumbs up, and whatnot on YouTube if you like the show. Of course, you could follow everything we do, various social media outlets. Steel City Underground is on Facebook, Twitter, and of course, steelcityunderground.com. You can find all of the good stuff. But until then, till next time, be good, be safe, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.